Good afternoon there, and welcome to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. This is your host, Michael Cross, and I was really kind of interested in this whole idea of where our society's going in regards to psychology. The thing is, I ran across a couple of articles that I thought were interesting. One of them from Camille Paglia, and it's basically Camille Paglia, How Bill Clinton is Like Bill Cosby. Now, she does a really good analysis of feminism and how we treat celebrities and the whole culture of power and that sort of thing. And I really appreciate her analysis because it's not one of those ones where, a lot of people just shut off when they hear the word feminist. She's actually quite unique, though. And I'd encourage people to take a look at the article. In fact, I'd also encourage people to take a look at, because I forgot to do a little plug, and that is take a look at my website at michaelcross.net, where I do a little bit of analysis there in a written form. So it's michaelcross.net. Here's a really good quote that she has. She's talking about the whole symbolism and so forth. But then she says, and thus, in this period of psychological blindness or inertness, our art has become dull. There's nothing interesting being written in fiction or plays or movies. Everything is boring because our failure to ask psychological questions. I'm going to do a little analysis there, what she's saying. I think ultimately what she's kind of saying is that we're no longer a probing society. When my dad came from Missouri, the show me state. And maybe that's why I was always raised with this attitude of always ask why. Never take anything for face value. Never actually just take anyone's word for something. You gotta see the evidence of it. And personally, I think that our society has veered away from that concept. We just accept something. If a celebrity says something, I remember I was watching one of Mark Dice's videos today, in which he just walked up to people along, it looks like a beachfront down in California or something. He's asking questions. He comes up with these preposterous positions. Things like, such and such celebrity says we should invade North Korea. And he asks people if they agree. He drops the name of some celebrities, then some made-up positions. And there are so many people that just say, oh, well, if Angelina Jolie agrees with that, or Jay-Z, and they'll just accept it. Or at least that's what they say in front of the camera. But the thing is this. In fact, I would actually say, if you see a camera rolling and recording you, why would you be more likely to say yes? I think I'd be more likely to say, I'd question it if I'm being recorded. But anyway, the thing is, I think this is where our society is. That if a celebrity says something, and that can include a politician, then we just accept it as fact, without questioning. And to take it a step further, like what Camille Paglia seems to be saying there, is we don't even go into the psychological background of whatever is being said. We don't analyze it. We're not like the Sigmund Freud, image that we have of him sitting there always asking, well, why? And then asking a question with a question and so forth. We just accept. And I think a lot of that has to do with our American education system, to be honest. I think there's other reasons, of course, but I think the American education system is really, really, really at the heart of this. And let me give an example. I just remember in school that you always had some teachers who, of course, really enjoyed and encouraged analytical thought, but you had others who would get up and they would grade you on dates. They would grade you on what they said. And so essentially it was just a bubble test all the time. And often it was just being able to say what the teacher had said. So no analysis whatsoever. American education is really, I think, quite stifling towards creativity, towards asking uncomfortable questions. In fact, think about all the times you've heard about situations in which we have had, there's been cases where student newspapers have written something controversial, usually political, and then, it gets censored by the administration. Now, the thing is, if you're really teaching journalism, it seems like unless something's really obscene or something, you'd be really liking people to ask uncomfortable questions, because that's what journalism should be all about. Not just basically just describing, oh, here's what happened with the football team or something like that. And I'll get to this particular point too, part of the school culture that I think is part of the problem. But let's veer on to another article that I found. And there's an article in Psychology Today, and it's called, and you should look this up, Anti-Intellectualism and the Dumbing Down of America. And the thing is this. Just lost screen there. Anyway, the thing that we have in our culture often is, well, and it's been around for a long time, is that our schools are not geared for really developing the skills necessary to succeed at life in the coming, 21st century. And that's kind of a shame, because one of the reasons why America has done so well in years past is because we have been a people who ask questions and were critical and always tried to find a better way to do something. That required creativity. Now, a lot of times, the people that were the ones that created things were the nonconformists. They were the ones who didn't do so well in school many times. They were the ones who maybe pushed the boundaries, and the boundaries pushed back, and things didn't go well for them, but they still succeeded, because there's a part of the American character that's based on that. Heck, we wouldn't have revolted against the British if we'd have just been just do what other people do and conform and don't bring attention to yourself. We'd still be speaking British English. The thing is that instead of developing this more, we're trying to weed it out. Now, I'll give you some examples here. This article from Psychology Today, what's interesting is, let me just read this to you and see what you think about it. In American schools, the culture exalts the athlete and good-looking cheerleader. Well-educated and intellectual students are commonly referred to in public schools and the media as nerds, dweebs, dorks, and geeks, and are relentlessly harassed and even assaulted by the more popular jocks for openly displaying any intellect. Now, I'll continue this in just a moment. I will say this. I have heard from so many teachers. In fact, I've sat in on classes where, you're training teachers, that the number one thing you need to do to get a job in the American public school system is not to be the smartest, brightest, or most creative teacher, but it's to be good at coaching something. That's right. In fact, many school districts in America, yes, I don't say, maybe most, I don't know, but many, they'll bring some administrators in, maybe the superintendent, principal, vice principal, those kinds of people, department heads, and they'll come into the room and they'll bring in candidates. And often the first question they ask is, what sports would you be good at coaching? Now, this is something that I think actually, I'm surprised feminists haven't kind of got onto this onto this particular issue, because ultimately I think this actually works against women. Now, why do I say that? Well, simply that if you have a system in which the person who would be the best at coaching football, baseball, basketball, and those kinds of sports is the one that's going to be given favoritism, and it's usually the male athletes, okay, then you're ultimately going to get a system in which your ideal candidate is going to be a male who is whether he was a jock in school or not, he probably was a jock, or at least a wannabe, he's going to be someone who's into the kind of sports culture. So maybe that's a reason why in American grade schools we tend to see predominantly female teachers, whereas in when you get into high schools, you see predominantly male teachers. I think that there's got to be an explanation. I think it's one of the explanations. Also, I've seen psychological profiles of different types of personalities that tend to gravitate towards early elementary education, secondary education, as in high school, and also university. And there is a difference. There is a major difference in the type of personalities. In fact, the more analytical the person is, the more likely they will not be in the lower grades. The more likely they will predominate when it comes to universities. Now, I think some of that probably has to do with this whole jock culture in the United States. Now, the thing is, I don't think a lot of Europeans that would hear this show would actually really understand this, unless they've watched a lot of TV programs that depict American high schools. And I will say this, more often than not, the depiction of American cliques and that school culture that's based on materialism and not so much what you do in class, but how you show up in class, as in what you wear and how you present yourself, whether in an argument or a discussion with a teacher or fellow students, well, that's what's really important. And that's kind of sad. But, I'm not getting down on school sports. If people want to have school sports, that's great. I've seen there's some students that would never succeed if they did not have a chance to be involved in sports. But I think that we really, if you think about it, the local newspaper, you get a huge headlines in the newspapers all the time that say, they'll showcase the boys basketball, football or wrestling or whatever seems to be the sport that that particular high school in the city does well in. And then let's say, I don't know, what if we have a situation in which the local debate society at school, if they still have them, a lot of times these academic clubs and art clubs and classes and music and stuff are the first things to be cut from school budgets, even though they always have enough money to spend on new scoreboards for the high school or whatever. The thing is that if they do have a debate team or some other academic team in the school, often it is the one that there'll be a mention of how well the students did. Page 4, community section of the local newspaper. All right? This is how things are seen in American public school systems. And, that's actually, as this article goes on, that seems to be kind of the opposite of what you would see in a lot of other countries. That you would, goes on here to say, these anti-intellectual attitudes are not reflected in students in most European or Asian countries whose educational levels have now equaled and will surpass that of the U.S. And most TV shows and movies, such as The Big Bang Theory, depict intellectuals as being geeks, if not effeminate. Now, I will say this, and actually say, not to cause some people like, oh my gosh, The thing is, I've seen studies have shown that the people that are usually depicted as nerds actually have higher testosterone, both male and female. And ultimately, they would not be effeminate in the negative sense. If they were, who cares? But the thing is, in American culture, of course, to say someone is effeminate is going to be a put down. And the thing is, I think a lot of that has to do with our growing militarism, which I'm going to get into in just a moment. Now, if you think about this whole thing that superficial counts, what is superficial counts as in who gets attention, then you're going to have situations where, and I've heard many cases where people do this, the really, really smart kid who happens also to be good at dance, so she goes out for cheerleading, or good at sports, so he or she goes out for sports, they will hide the fact that they are good in school. So if their studying has equaled getting A's on all of their work, they won't brag about that because that could actually hurt them socially. Now, this is part of the culture of the American school system. That doesn't mean I'm not going to get down on teachers, because one of the things this article does point out is if you go to other countries, teachers are highly valued. I'm not going to say all of them, but in countries, for instance, like, I'll just bring this up, Finland, China, Singapore, Middle Eastern countries, teachers are seen as professors. They are seen as very, very, very important. And in the American system, I don't think that respect really exists there. In the sense that, I've seen this happen with people where they will, they'll be in a discussion and someone will know that they're in education, and they'll say, "Oh, so where are you a professor at?" And then the person will say, "Oh, well, no, I'm a high school teacher. I teach such and such." And you will suddenly see the level of respect that person talking to them has. Suddenly, you'll see all the facial expressions stuff suddenly drop. Kind of like, "Oh, okay." Now, the thing is, I think that the way that teachers don't have a lot of respect in the American system, the fact that you have a system itself that, well, I think George Bush really, really kind of pushed this, the whole, you judge a school by its test scores versus anything else. So then you start teaching to the test, so it's more important to know that George Washington was born such and such a day, or George Washington won this particular battle, than it is to know why George Washington decided to go against the crown and to lead the revolt in favor of independence for the United States. See, that goes back to what Camille Paglia was talking about. You got to know the reasons behind something. Knowing the facts doesn't give you any information. All right? And all it will do is leave people with a lot of something they can win maybe on a game show, but it won't teach the hows and whys. And I think that's very important that we know the hows and whys. Psychology is very vital in knowing why people behave a certain way. Marketers need to know this stuff. Film directors need to know that kind of stuff. If they don't make as good as shows. However, nowadays, maybe the fact that people aren't really as probing and intellectual. They like to see, detective shows with young women with their cleavage showing, and, jock type guys, just all of a sudden in these, really fancy, high tech crime rooms, be able to find the murderer in 1 hour, not including commercials. Or should I say including commercials. The thing is that this just reinforces the whole fact that we're not a probing people. And so Also, let's get into media. The media operates on the assumption that the more people that view your shows, the more money you make. And that's what makes you a more marketable commodity. Now, the thing is, I think we're seeing more and more of this. I mean, if you watch American TV, a lot of it is just so dumb. Situation comedies. If you compare the situation comedies that existed, like, I don't know, All in a Family or MASH, yeah, I know it had a liberal bent to, those shows. But if you compare the quality that went into those shows with the stuff that's out nowadays, all right, at least they were encouraging people to think, although, they kind of encourage them to think more the liberal way. Now, the shows don't leave you really thinking. They're just time consuming, something to watch to pass the time. Now, there are exceptions to this. There's some shows on regular network TV that seem to try to cater to a more intelligent audience. The stuff that you find on cable networks, usually the big ones, HBO, Showtime, that stuff, they seem to be way above the network TV levels, and they really strive to get people to at least have to think about a program and a plot. But the thing is that overall, with Americans watching an average of 5 hours of TV per day. I'm sorry, 5 hours a week is enough. 5 hours per day. Most of what they're watching is filler. And then you switch on the news. There's a soundbite. Okay? Let's get past schools and popular entertainment. I don't want to spend too much time on popular entertainment. And let's just go right into the news. I mean, we've got the news, which, everyone likes to jump on Fox network. The one thing I can say about Fox is usually they at least have a debate going on a lot of their shows. They'll bring in people with different viewpoints. Now, they may in some way show their bias, the person that's hosting, but all shows do. Every single one of them do, whatever network it is. The thing is, at least Fox shows different people arguing, and that seems to be a part of the format. Whereas the other network programs, it seems to be more of a, hey, welcome to such and such news. Now let me tell you what you need to know. And it's just little sound bites. Oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. It's just, without analyzing it. The other day, there was a news show on, and my wife was like, well, why are it just said that Turkey had bombed Kurdish positions. Now, the thing is, that seems weird because you're thinking, well, the Kurds are the ones fighting ISIS. Well, the thing is, you've got to be able to analyze the whole geopolitical situation in Turkey and how it relates with the Kurds, how it relates to ISIS, how it relates all that whole region. But the news programs generally don't do that. Now, alternative news, they do. In fact, to a point that's almost like you're sitting in a professor's room. Sometimes you may disagree, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, whatever, but at least they treat the people listening with respect. And they will show the details, the historical backgrounds, the motivations. You don't see this in our soundbite culture in the big network news programs. It's, whoa, why bother with that? Oh, by the way, here's this and this and this. And now let's talk to you about our celebrities, how they're doing. So you'll have celebrity stuff. There's something about, recently a lot of stuff's been out there on the internet, about some guy that allegedly went over to Africa and shot a lion. Okay? Now, I'm not big on people that go out and hunt for sport. Never have been. I understand it when you go out and you want the challenge of shooting a deer and then having meat for your family and stuff like that. Nothing goes to waste. I respect that. But I've never gotten into this whole idea, the whole safari fantasy of going over and shooting an elephant, a rhino, or or something like that. It kind of reminds me of, what was the name of that movie? The Butterfly Effect, where or the book where you could pay to go, you could you could go back in time and kill a dinosaur that was aged so that you knew that it was not going to affect the timeline if you did that. And of course it does, and, things go wrong. However, the thing is that the problem I see is not so much in reporting these events where someone goes over and kills a relatively tame lion. It's more the sense that it takes such people are all talking about, it's the water cooler discussion versus maybe some of the big issues that are going on that really affect people's lives in very deep ways, whether they be social, political, or economic. It's okay, I guess it's in American society, it's considered safe to talk about someone that went over and shot a lion versus, why don't we talk about what's going on with Greece, or what's going on with America's military industrial complex, or these kinds of issues, or even issues about. There was an article in the Mirror I would encourage people to look up. Just type this into Google, Pentagon, UK Mirror, censorship, and dealing with movies and how the U.S. government actually has a big role in censoring film. Or at least say, well, you should include this or you shouldn't include this in your plot. And the thing is, these are things that people should be talking about. Yes, I know everyone relates to the whole lion thing or something, and it's something that, political ideology is not going to make a big deal. But still, it's not a huge issue in comparison to everything else that's going on. But then again, in American society, what are the big issues? Celebrities, who they're sleeping with, who they got pregnant with, what kinds of Botox or rear end enhancement, or, did so-and-so get breast augmentation? These are issues that really seem to matter. And again, our society, I think that if we were more into the analysis, that we respected analysis, that we showed it more in television, that we showed it more in schools. What was this? Someone told me there was one state, I won't mention what state, but I was talking to a teacher who said that in his state, teachers aren't allowed to show YouTube videos in class. It could have been either his state or his school district. And the thing is, this basically just means what? If the teacher finds something really interesting that happened in the world and it happens to be covered, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, it might be a news report done by Russia Today or, some alternative news site. Maybe, it shouldn't be in there. Maybe you don't want to be exposing students to something besides that news channel that comes on in the morning and schools get special deals on audiovisual equipment and stuff like that if they play it. The thing is that, again, we're not showcasing analysis enough. Instead of looking at someone who maybe, let's say they bring up something totally atrocious, if they're trying to analyze something, some meaning, some conspiracy, if you want to say. Instead of meeting them with like this look like, huh? And looking at them like they're absolutely insane, or that you just want to change the subject, why not ask a few questions? Experience the idea of actually engaging in a debate in which you have to analyze something and they have to analyze something, and you have to come to some sort of conclusion, or at least it's like playing a game of chess. You can debate it, and then, maybe you learn something and they learn something. One thing I really like about Greek and Italian culture, they love to debate. I've heard this about French culture too. They like to sit around, have their donut or whatever for breakfast, and debate what's going on in the world. Now, before you look down on the Southern European traditions, we got to wonder, is our tradition any better? I mean, where we don't talk to people, where if someone reads something at the check stand out loud and goes, "That's really stupid," and then there's a few people that might, nod, and a few other people that look like, "What is wrong with this person? Are they a mental case or something?" We need to actually have a situation where we value people expressing their opinions and then backing those opinions up, whether we agree with them or not. And this should be done more in school. We need to have more debate. We need to have more psychology. We need to have more classes that deal with marketing. And yes, we need to have more humanities. We need to have, we need to have stuff about, we need to have, we really do need to put more into school music and art and debate and Model United Nations courses and things like that. Those should not be the first things cut, so that there can be a bigger scoreboard, a digitized scoreboard, for local basketball games or something like that. Those programs should be cherished because at least they are encouraging people to use their minds and analyze. And, I know that people will say, yeah, but sports are important because, you need to have physical fitness and it teaches teamwork. Well, the thing is, physical fitness is great as well. And that should be emphasized in PE. And, and now I don't want to go in. I was going to just say that we need to have a situation in our physical education programs in which we try to encourage students to improve and then use what they learn as lifelong applications so that they will stay fit. And, there's a lot of people, think about all you guys have gone to 10-year reunions and, the football hero or wrestling hero or basketball hero. They're like obese. They look like they just, they've been at all-you-can-eat restaurants for the last 10 years because what we don't teach is that these are lessons for life. Not just that, senior year, got my letter, got all this, I'm the star of this, got this trophy. Now what? Then you just don't exercise anymore. And then the kids that never did make it on the team, what about them? They're just like, yeah, whatever. Instead of PE being focused on fitness for life and why you should be fit. And if you have problems with motivating yourself, how to motivate yourself better. Okay? We need to have those kinds of approaches, not that, and we need to have teachers of all kinds. We don't just need people who are good at sports coaching in schools. Einstein could never get, if he were to, with his background, go to school, I want to teach math. Well, sorry, you don't have anything down for coaching. That's atrocious. In fact, if you were to mention that in schools around Europe or Asia, they'd be like, you're kidding. Well, that's the way it is. So anyway, just encourage people, to basically, try to get past this culture of non-questioning, or else we're going to wind up in a culture in which we're going to have those aspects of some cultures that, you learn a lot, but you don't really ask a lot of questions. But we're going to have that, but we're going to also be at the situation where not having very good academic excellence. So we're just not going to ask questions, and also we're not going to have the academic excellence either. And that's, I think what we ultimately need to do is learn from other school systems around the world. We could learn a lot from countries like Finland, China, Japan. In fact, I think even Japan, their school system's based on what the old American school system used to be. That's pretty pathetic when we actually realize that a lot of, the country that really does well academically is basing a lot of their school system on what we used to have. And maybe we need to get back to that. And yes, we need to be probing. Okay? If we're going to compete with countries like China and India in the future, then we need to have all the skills we can get. Okay? I mean, we really need to have that. And also in our political process, we need to be able to look past the sound bites and the 10 seconds the person is on the air. And, if they're on the air for 10 seconds, how can we blame people that say, yeah, I'm going to vote for this guy because he has such a nice smile? Okay, well, isn't that what the news is really promoting? With the soundbite culture? Oh, he said that in the debate really well. You watch the debates. It's going to be like this one had the best zinger of all time. And that sort of thing. That's not what is going to get you the best statesman in the future. I'm sorry to say that. Anyway, that's all I want to deal with the psychology. And I want to deal with some other current events here in the next part of the show. I was just going to deal a little bit with one of the big current events taking place right now. That happens to be the whole Cecil the Lion thing. Let's think about this, okay? This has captured worldwide attention. Yes, it's a lion, and people, this was a special one that had been featured on documentaries. It was fairly tame and so forth. The thing is that, again, I just remember a while back, there was a video that featured ISIS members, and they were beheading some Ethiopian Christians they had captured. And just a little bit earlier than that, some Egyptian Christians that they had captured on a beach. They did the execution video. I'm just trying to remember how much attention was focused on that, how much outrage you saw coming from people, as opposed to Cecil the Lion. Now, I see why. I see why, because human beings have an attachment to certain animals. Most animals, people don't really care that much about. If a person hits a possum when driving, they usually don't agonize over it, and it's certainly not going to get reported in the newspaper. If someone hits an armadillo, or if someone goes out, and I know people do this in the Southwest, go out and shoot prairie dogs and that sort of thing. I don't get into that. I don't see any need to go out and just, unless it's a pest type situation, like I know, like in Australia, they have a thing with cane toads. They encourage people to kill them. In Oregon, I remember a long time ago there was a encouragement to kill bullfrogs because they're an invasive species and they wipe out a lot of native species of turtles and frogs and other amphibians and so forth. Essentially, a bullfrog will even eat a bird if a bird happens to land next to it. They're quite destructive. But the thing is, no one makes a big deal about this kind of thing. And I think it's the same as how we project human feelings and human emotions and so forth onto, our pets, our animals that we consider pets. Dogs, cats, when people hear of people in Asia, in some countries where they eat dogs or they eat cats, I think eating dog is much more prevalent. I've been to China many times and restaurants will feature dog, but I've heard there's only some regions of China where you'd be able to find cat. But even still, we look at it and think, oh, wow, and you think back to your dog or your cat that you had as a pet. And the thing with the Cecil the Lion is, if we think about, the lion is symbolic. It's used in the coat of arms, symbols and so forth, in all throughout Europe and Ethiopia and all kinds of other regions. The lion takes on a almost metaphysical appearance in people's thoughts and their emotions that they project onto it. And, they're one of the most popular animals when you go to the zoo. Everyone wants to see the lions. Now, the thing is, though, that other animals, horses are different. I mean, most people don't eat horse meat in the United States, although much of Europe, they do actually raise horses for food. The thing is, when it comes to cows, when it comes to chickens, when it comes to pigs, when it comes to goats, when it comes to, I can just keep going on and on and on. The thing is that these animals are killed every day. And yet no one makes a huge, except for some animal rights groups and hardcore vegans and so forth, you really won't see too much of an uproar about that. So essentially, yes, lions are one of those animals, especially when you put a name on it. Okay? If this was lion number 473, whatever, from game reserve, give the name of the game reserve, people wouldn't place as much emotion on this. And also you get the whole aspect, too, that some guy, I don't know, I have no idea what motivates him. Maybe he grew up on Tarzan movies or something and saw the safaris. The thing is, you get someone who has the money to go to Africa and shoot an animal. Okay? So you got all these factors come together. So you got the archetypical, in people's minds, the archetypical villain, and the victim being Cecil. But still, I'm just wondering, I mean, we have a lot of stuff going on right now with wars. I use that biblical phrase, wars and rumors of wars. The thing is, there's people dying every day. There are people dying from violent crime. There's been, I don't want to go into a lot of detail on other issues right now, but there's been some cases that have focused attention on many policies that the U.S. government is following right now, and many of which have resulted in innocent people being killed, murdered, and so forth. And then it gets some attention, but not nearly as much as this has gotten. You get like I said, you've got terrorist situations. It's almost as if people don't care as much about people as they do about a symbol. And again, an animal is more than just a symbol, obviously, but still ultimately it's what elicits the emotions in people's minds. Now, this brings me to a point that's related to what I was talking about earlier. If we talk about how our emotions are focused in certain ways, how our emotions are directed in large part by social media and also just regular media, I mean, it's almost kind of scary in the sense that, we've got people out there like Edward Bernays when he said that our emotions and our customs and our taste and our opinions are molded by a very small elite. And this elite knows how to get into our minds and be able to get a reaction from us. And ultimately, this is where I really like to put some attention on. Not so much the lion, not so much the animal rights or what terrorist groups are doing and that sort of thing, But just getting to the point that we really recognize just how much we are led around and how much hooks are. I mean, we're almost led around. I'm thinking about this analogy. I was going to use the hook in the nose of the bull. You know, that you got this huge creature, but you can still control it through having a rope attached to a nose ring. But also, I remember I read somewhere, and I don't know if it's true or not, because I've never really lived around elephants. But I heard that if you raise an elephant when it's young, and you have a chain around it, and then as it gets older, you just have to put something around its leg, not even a chain anymore, but it'll still perceive that as being a strong chain controlling it. And if we think about that for just a moment, we really are controlled. We're told what to freak out about. We're told what to not pay much attention to. We're told through the language and so forth of the people who are in positions of power what is polite and what isn't. I just recently read an article in a California newspaper that was talking about Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz got up, and I guess he hurt, the feelings of some senators because he criticized some fellow Republicans and so forth, and then now everyone's all outraged. The elite are kind of outraged, and complaining. Even some senators got up and said, this is not the way the Senate operates. Well, actually, you should look back through history. Some of the people have said, it's never been like this ever. You go back through history. Look up Strom Thurmond / fight in Senate. Okay, just look that up. If anyone remembers Strom Thurmond, he was the senator, I think, who served to the oldest. He served in the U.S. Senate to past the age of 100. And, he had quite a reputation. The younger senators tended to admire the fact that he was married to a young woman and had a family with her and so forth. But the thing is, if we go back even further than that, you look back to the old days, back in, the 19th century, people settled their quarrels, in Congress and the Senate. They'd settle their quarrels, the next day at dawn with a choice of weapons. Okay? It has not been a situation where everyone's got up and treated each other like, their grandma was sitting there and, ready to scold them if they were impolite or didn't have manners and criticize someone and hurt their little feelings, okay? I mean, that is not what history has been like. But nowadays, it's like, you got Ted Cruz, he gets up, he criticizes some people, and all of a sudden, people are like reacting, like, well, this is not the way things should be. And you got, the newspaper I was talking about that basically makes it look like, that, there's a few good Republican senators that are able to show manners and decorum and so forth in the Senate. And that's kind of, I almost said a bad word there. The thing is, the news media is losing its grip on the public psyche. And much of it is due to alternative media and, how it can reach people. Again, going back to Cecil the Lion, much of the focus that's been put on this lion has been through social media. people forwarding stuff on Facebook, people forwarding stuff on Twitter. It's been this kind of, I would call it almost guerrilla news. Not gorilla as in animal that lives in the mountains of, Tanzania, but guerrilla, where people are able to make statements and share them and share them and share them. Now, one I will say, though, before I lose track of this, is that I would encourage people listening now, I would encourage people that are social conservatives and so forth, traditional, libertarian, constitutional, whatever, to start using social media more to get the word out. When news programs come out and say, "Whoa, this is the big news today," and you ever notice how you switch the channel and it's the same stories? It's just a different person reading off the teleprompter. And the thing that is it's the ability by a small number of corporations who have very strong connections to this establishment to be able to focus people's attentions and basically give them just enough information that they think they know what they're talking about if they talk to other people. I know that's becoming a rarity nowadays, people talking to one another. But think about the fact that people are living on their iPhones, they are using Twitter, they are using all of these other types of social media to get information out to one another. Now, if we consider the fact that this is, if you look at the Cecil the Lion thing, this is an example of how you can get information out. Well, what if people who are, what if you try to get this kind of information out about your favorite candidate or the issue that's really, really, really on your mind? What if you were trying to use this social media to get out there and inform people? Now think about this. Think about this for a moment. If you're able to break a person's reliance on media, make them question it, make them, the next time they turn on the news, feel like, what am I doing wasting my time watching this? Because this is not really what I believe in. It used to be, think about this, 20 years ago, if you turned on the news and it was just basically a choice. If you were into the Constitution, if you were social conservative, if you were, supporter of traditional family values, those sorts of things, it was more like which news network was least abrasive towards your beliefs. And that's the one you would watch. And it would still get you angry. You'd still be sitting there like, okay, well, I disagree with this. I don't like what they're saying, but, I got to be informed. Now, think about why that has changed. You don't have to do that anymore. You can pick and choose. Camille Paglia recently wrote an article in which she said, she's a liberal, okay, but she's almost like the super ego of liberalism, the conscience of liberalism, where she's saying, wait a minute, take a look at this Planned Parenthood thing, the Planned Parenthood issue. People should look at both sides, even though she may support legalized abortion. She said that people deserve to be able to see all aspects of the issue. And traditionally, the network news has not allowed people that opportunity. You get one particular viewpoint with a little bit of deviation. But that was 20 years ago. That's not the case now. Now, I will admit it's hard. It's really hard to break the paradigm that you can trust the news the older the person is. If you look at who's watching watching TV news nowadays or reads newspapers nowadays, it is not young people. Less and less and less young people say that they rely on television news, for instance. Okay? The average American spends 5 hours a night watching TV. I know it's pretty pathetic. But less and less young people are spending time on TV. And when they are on TV, they're not watching news. And then you go into the middle-age group, and you have less of them watching the news, although many more of them are still watching news than young people. And then you get into the older people, like 65 and above, and you see a very large proportion of them watch the news. Now, the problem is that they grew up in a period where they still were taught this is, the news media competes and they're going to get the story out and so forth. Maybe they still remember back to the Nixon investigations and the Woodward and Bernsteins and Daniel Ellsberg and how the media really did work to inform the people. The media doesn't do that anymore. Look at the way they treat Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. Okay, it's a different world. But yet, people that are older, hard to convince them. But maybe your target group should be both young, because maybe they need to be a little bit more informed, and they're going to have a more open mind. Okay? They've grown up in an era where they don't just accept this is the way it is. Although they may not have been given a lot of information when going to school, if you're listening from the United States, they still are going to thirst for wanting to have accuracy. And be honest, I know a lot of them, they watch, the Daily Show or something like that, and they get a lot of their information from there. But the one good thing about the Daily Show is at least it mocks the establishment, even though it comes from a liberal viewpoint. Because the establishment needs mocking. It needs people questioning. Okay? Even kings and queens in the old days had the court jester who could mock them. Now, often they were also considered their advisors. Kind of like their Secretary of States or Secretary of Interiors or that sort of thing. But still, people need to be able to look past just the, here it is, accept it. We wouldn't accept that when it comes to food. We would not accept, there's 6 corporations that own all of the media. Would we accept the existence of only 6 corporations serving us our fast food? We would be like, okay, which one will it be today? And then you go to this one or this one or this one. The thing is, we would never stand for it. We'd be like, I want something different. We'd be demanding something different. So remember, there are people out there that are demanding something different. Let them see. Show them. Just give them a little bit of extra information. Show them the station. Ask them, hey, why don't you listen to some of the shows here once in a while? Thank you for tuning in, and hope you'll come back next week for Unlocked Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Bye now.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY